What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our new channel sponsor, International MTG. If you're looking for competitive pricing on your favorite MTG cards, old and new, be sure to check out the International MTG store and TCG Player, link in the description of this video. As well as our second channel sponsor, the Hobby Horse in Taylorville, Illinois. If you're ever in town, be sure to stop in and say hi to Martin. On this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta, we're bringing you the first Precon game of the season, featuring the new pre-constructed decks from March of the Machine. This week's matchup features Martin playing the Esper Cavalry Charge deck being led by Sidar Jabari of Zhalfir, Ryan playing Kasla, the Broken Halo, and the Jeskai Divine Convocation deck, Fogral playing the Coffer backup deck using the backup commander Shalai and Hallar, and finally Patrick playing Gimbal, Gremlin Prodigy, and the Temur Tinker Time deck. Now that we have our fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Martin plays a tapped Thriving Heath naming black. Ryan plays the Plains, and Fog plays a tapped Lano Reborn, which enters with a +1/+1 counter. Patrick plays a tapped Temple of Epiphany, scrying one card, keeping it on top of his library. Martin plays a Command Tower for turn and then pays 2 to cast a Worthy Knight. Ryan plays an Island for turn and then passes. Fog plays an Exotic Orchard, while Patrick plays a tapped Myriad Landscape, also passing. Martin plays a Swamp for turn and then pays 3 for a Knight Exemplar, which creates a 1/1 human token when it enters play. He then goes to combat, swinging at Fog for 3 damage, which then allows him to draw a card before he then discards a card. Ryan draws for turn and then pays 2 for a Fractured Power Stone. Fog plays a Force for turn and then pays 3 for a Mana Gorger Hydra, which he then grafts his 1/1 counter onto. Patrick plays a tapped Path of Ancestry and passes. Martin plays a tapped Thriving Isle naming white, before he then goes to combat, choosing to swing both of his creatures at Fog for 5 damage. This then has him drawing another card and discarding a card. Ryan plays a second Island for turn before paying 4 for a Keeper of the Accord, which puts a counter on Fog's Hydra. Fog plays the Plains for turn, then taps out in order to cast his commander, which adds a counter to his Hydra and allows him to shoot Martin for 1 damage. On his end step, Ryan creates a Soldier token and searches his land for a Plains, while Patrick untaps for turn. Patrick plays an Evolving Wilds for turn, before he then pays to crack his Myriad Landscape in order to go get 2 lands from his library, while he then shortcuts and cracks his Evolving Wilds as well. He then goes and gets 2 forests, which he puts into play tapped, as well as going to getting an island. On his end step, Martin flashes in a Liliana Standard Bearer, which adds another counter to Fog's Hydra and has him shooting Martin for another damage. Martin then creates another human token with a Knight entering and draws for turn. He then plays a Plains for turn and decides to swing out at Patrick with all of his creatures, which has Patrick dropping down to 28 life, while he then draws a card and discards a card. He then pays to cast Sir Conrad the Grim, which adds another counter to Fog's Hydra, but has Fog shooting Ryan for 1 damage this time while he creates another human token. On his end step, Ryan creates another Soldier token and goes to get another Plains from his library before he starts his turn. Ryan then pays 3 and casts a Chasm Skulker, which adds another counter to Fog's Hydra and shoots Ryan for another damage. Fog plays a Furicome Snarl for turn, revealing a Plains from his hand. He then pays 5 and casts Path of the Pyromancer. Will of the Planeswalker does not come into play here, but he still discards all the cards in his hand, giving him 5 red mana and having him draw 6 cards. This then also adds a counter to his Hydra, which uses to ping Ryan once again. He then goes to combat and swings his commander Martin for 3 commander damage before passing turn. Patrick just plays an untapped Cinderglade for turn, and on his end step, Ryan creates another Soldier token and goes to get another Plains from his library while Martin untaps for turn. Martin draws and plays a Swamp for turn, before he then goes to combat, swinging his Exemplar and 3 humans at Patrick and the rest of his Knights at Fog. In response, Ryan casts Swords to Plowshares, exiling the Exemplar, which has Martin gaining 2 life and his creatures losing indestructible. Fog then blocks 2 of Martin's creatures, which then has each player losing a life because of Sir Conrad being on the field, before Patrick then takes the rest of his damage. Martin then casts an Acclaimed Contender, which has Martin getting pinged by Fog for 1 damage, before he then looks at the top 5 cards of his library, whiffing. He then bottoms the rest of the cards before he casts a Sigiled Sword of Valor, which has a counter to Fog's Hydra, and has Ryan getting pinged for 1 damage. Ryan plays a Terramorphic Expanse for turn before he then cracks it to go get the mountain that he needed. He then casts a Mentor of the Meek, which has a counter to Fog's Hydra and has him losing 1 life. He then goes to combat, which has him swinging 2 of his creatures at Patrick, taking him down to 19 life before he passes turn. Fog plays a Rogue's Passage for turn before he then casts Earth from his graveyard, where X is equal to 4. This then adds a counter to his Hydra, pinging Martin for 1 damage before the board gets wiped of all creatures with toughness 4 or less. He then goes to combat, swinging his Hydra at Ryan, which then takes him down to 21 life, while he also swings his commander at Martin, taking him down to 32 life and giving him 6 commander damage. Patrick draws for turn and then plays his own Exotic Orchard before passing. Martin draws for turn and then pays to cast his commander, Sidar Jabari, which then adds a counter to Fogg's Hydra, shooting him for 1, before his commander then gets countered by Patrick with a Spell Swindle. Ryan plays his second mountain for turn before tapping out in order to cast Path of the Ghost Hunter, which adds a counter to Fogg's Hydra, shooting him for 1 damage, before he then creates 7 1/1 Spirit tokens. Fogg plays a tapped Temple of Plenty for turn, scrying a card to the bottom of his library. He then casts a Conclave Mentor, adding a counter to his Hydra and shooting Martin for 1 damage. He then casts Rishkar Pima Renegade, adding 2 counters to his Hydra, shooting Martin for 2 damage. He then uses Rishkar's triggers, adding counters to his Conclave Mentor as well as his commander, which has him shooting Martin for 2 damage both times. Fogg then goes to combat and swings his commander Martin in the air for 5 more commander damage. Patrick plays a Frostboil Snarl for turn, revealing an island from his hand. He then casts a Master of Ethereum, adding counters to Fogg's Hydra and shooting Ryan for 2 damage. He then pays to cast his commander Gimbal, which adds 2 more counters to Fogg's Hydra and this time shoots Patrick for 2 damage. Patrick then casts an Academy Manufacturer, adding 2 more counters to Fogg's Hydra, before he then goes to his end step, creating an Artifact Gremlin token with 1 counter on it. Martin slowly draws for a turn and then plays another Swamp. He then pays 5 to recast his commander a second time, which has him adding 2 counters to Fogg's Hydra and getting shot for 2 damage. Ryan draws for turn and then pays to cast Saint Traft and Ren Carlos, which has him getting shot for 2 damage. He then also pays to cast his commander Kasla, which has him getting shot for 2 more damage, before he then goes to combat, swinging his commander at Fogg for 5 damage. Fogg plays a Fortified Village for turn, revealing a forest from his hand. He then pays to cast a Colonian Hydra, which then adds 2 more counters to his other Hydra and then shoots Patrick for 2 more damage. Fogg then goes to combat, swinging his super big Hydra at Ryan, taking him out of the game, while he swings his commander in the air over at Patrick for 5 commander damage. Patrick plays an island for turn, then uses his creatures to help improvise a Reverse Engineer, which has him drawing 3 additional cards. This then adds more counters to his Hydra and shoots Martin for 2 damage. He then casts a Saheeli's Artistry, which comes in as a copy of Fogg's commanders, but then has him getting shot for 2 damage. He then creates multiple tokens off his manufacturer, and ironically goes to his end step, creating an Artifact Gremlin, which has him entering with 4 counters, shooting Fogg for 4 damage. Martin plays a Plains for turn and then pays to equip his commander with the Sigil. He then goes to combat, swinging his commander in the air at Fogg, who chooses not to block, taking all the damage, while he then creates a token, coming in attacking, as well as drawing a card and discarding a card off his commander's ability. Second main, he casts Josu Vest, which then has Patrick getting shot for 2 more damage. Fogg plays a tapped Temple of Triumph, which has him scrying another card to the bottom of his library. He then goes to combat, swinging a Hydra at each of his opponents, and with Colonian Hydra doubling the counters on each of his creatures, this then gives him enough damage to win the game. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.